Hello, 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 and welcome to the Week Unspun, a weekly live look at what is happening around the world through the eyes of PR pros. My name is Fazana Badgerwell, and I am joining you from London.
My name's Doug Downs. I'm in Canada's Rocky Mountains.
And I'm David Gallagher in my hometown of Round Rock, Texas. And if it's okay, I'm going to introduce our special guest, Joanna Gordon. She will, for reasons that will be obvious later, she'll say why she's here and why we're so happy to have her. But this relates to the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos next week. But I'll say, Joanna, thank you. As I was saying before the show, you were one of the very patient guides when I was more active with the forum, and I still benefit from some of the relationships you helped me create. And so glad you could join us from Paris, right?
Exactly. Delighted to be here and get to contribute to some of the discussions today. So thank you.
Welcome, Joanna. Now, this week seems incredibly packed, as is every week, let's be honest. Now, please do drop your thoughts in the chat, comment away, and we will see if we can try and get to them before the end of the show. Now, we've got three stories that we're going to do a bit of a deep dive on. We're going to start off in Greenland, where security language is colliding with sovereignty. And Greenland is, of course, fighting to stay the author of its own story. Now, we're then going to head over to Minnesota, where the tensions are rising again after a second ICE-related shooting, and the real fight is over legitimacy and who the public trusts when force enters the frame. And finally, we'll close at Davos, where the world's biggest leaders and brands are heading over there next week, competing to define what it looks like, the world in 2026, from boardrooms to big world stages. And Doug, let's start off with Greenland.
All right. And, every week, the three of us, we try actively to keep Donald Trump out of the news headlines that we're trying to cut, right? Like the three, how do we keep him out? And yet we've got him in Greenland and we've sort of got him in Minnesota as well. Tensions around Greenland have escalated, right? After renewed U.S. political statements arguing that American control of the island is necessary for national and international security. Denmark and Greenland rejected the idea outright, restating that Greenland is not for sale and that its future rests with its people. Now, in parallel, Denmark and its allies have increased military visibility in the Arctic, including deployments and exercises around Greenland, framed as routine, but they're clearly symbolic. NATO is positioning these moves as collective defense, not escalation, where diplomats search for a way to manage security concerns without reopening the sovereignty question. Now, to the public relations perspective, this is a story, in my opinion, about who gets to define security and how language makes power sound reasonable. When the United States speaks, it uses the calm voice of protection. Denmark and Greenland answer with a tougher word: sovereignty, autonomy. The first battle is the frame. National security is meant to end debate by sounding technical and inevitable. Denmark and Greenland, their words are very clear. We're not for sale, because once you argue terms, you've already accepted the idea. In comms, this is the rule. Never speak the dialect of the opposition. Use your own words. Another note from a comms perspective is alliance signaling. The military moves are not just strategic, they're communicative. The message is reassurance. We're present, we're united, without validating the claim that unilateral action is necessary. The risk is fine, but real. If your response looks reactive, you strengthen the story you're trying to contain. And the final chapter is Greenland's balancing act. Its leadership has changed since this article in Time in 2021, but the position has stayed careful and consistent. Greenland does not want to keep the United States out. It wants more presence, more partnership, more investment. Greenlanders want America. They just don't want to be American. The communications risk is real. Asking for support can be misread as surrendering agency. Now, the lesson here is sharper than it looks. You can invite a partner in, but Farzana, the moment the story shifts from partnership to possession, you lose the authority that you were trying to strengthen.
Well, what's interesting here, Doug, is although Greenland is the center of the story, it's pretty much treated as a backdrop in terms of narrative control. So you're hearing what the US have got to say, you're hearing what Denmark, NATO, other sort of countries. And of course, what happens in the real world is you're ability to control the narrative has real world impacts. I think it's about narrative authorship, and so you're occasionally getting some sort of cut through with Greenlanders talking about what they want, but very little. I mean, the conversation is predominantly between NATO, Greenland, and Denmark.
I just want to
Adrian.
comment. You're talking about the sign, their voice, but there are only 50,000. It's a population of 50,000 people in Greenland. So how does that voice? How can they have a strong voice versus how many voices in the U.S.? What's the population?
Yeah,
So,
it should be more polls and surveys. I've seen streeters in media, but David, like, that's not enough nearly to cover.
Yeah, I don't know if it comes down to kind of per capita share of voice. But I take your point. It's a small country. I don't think this comes down to narrative authorship, though. I don't think Greenland really has a standalone narrative. And in fact, I think if they try to express this as some sort of referendum on their sovereignty, they'll lose. And I think that splitting away from Denmark and from NATO would be exactly the wrong thing to do. This is a moment for solidarity, for alliances, for partnership. I think it's the only way Greenland can advance its best interest is in partnership with its partner, with its with the Kingdom of Denmark and with the NATO allies. I also think that if they for a moment show a sliver of separation from their partners, it'll be exploited by the Trump administration. See, they don't really belong. They don't really want to be in places. Last thing I'll say is I don't think the U.S. sounds reasonable in this. They already have effective military control of Greenland. They already have agreements with Denmark in terms of how mineral rights and future resources could be managed. So I think this comes down to a personal issue for whatever reason for Donald Trump, and I don't think it sounds that reasonable on the world stage. We'll hear more about this, I guess, next week, Joanna, when the president travels to Switzerland. But I think this is bigger than Greenland sovereignty.
David, you're in the hills of Texas right now. You flip on the TV, you pick up a newspaper. Is it Greenland? Is it Minnesota? Is it Iran? Like, what's the lead story for?
This is a strange thing. So as you know, I'm usually based in London, so I see everything through a UK filter. Right. I think that actually affects my social media feeds. Sitting here in purple Texas, but red Williamson County, just on the edge of the hill country, you get a different view. Greenland is not really registering right now. And I don't think that's a surprise. A lot of times geopolitical affairs don't dominate local American news, probably much the same as the rest of the world. So no, Minnesota is front and center for social media feeds and for the news.
Yeah, and I see it. If I flip around at night, I'll go CNN, MSNBC, Fox, right? And sort of, and the tensions in Minneapolis, Minnesota, they're playing big on Fox News, big time. And obviously CNN. Well, they've spiked again after a second shooting involving a U.S. immigration and customs enforcement agents. On Wednesday, an ICE officer shot a man in the leg during an enforcement stop after the man allegedly tried to flee and attacked the agent with a shovel and makeshift weapon. This incident comes just 1 week after another ICE agent fatally shot Renee Good, a 37-year-old mother, during an operation in the city, sparking a lot of protest and sharp criticism from local officials. Demonstrations, of course, have continued, with community members demanding accountability and transparency, while both state leaders and the federal government remain sharply at odds over enforcement tactics and investigation control. To me, this is a communication story about legitimacy under pressure and about who the public believes when force enters the frame. Federal authorities insist their actions are lawful and necessary. Local leaders and communities are saying something different, that the process itself has lost all credibility. The first tension is, again, narrative control. Federal statements focus on enforcement and self-defense, while city and state voices focus on transparency and accountability. And both sides are speaking past one another now. And in that vacuum, trust drains fast. The fight is not only over facts, but over who gets to define what's happening. The second tension is investigation and authority. By keeping probes tightly federal, officials may be protecting procedure, but they also signal distance. When communities feel shut out of the truth-finding process, suspicion becomes the story. Legal caution might be rational, but it rarely leads to confidence. And the final tension is escalation. Federal deployments and hard national rhetoric raise the temperature, but local rhetoric does that too. When mayors and governors use language that paint the other side as illegitimate, it can harden camps and sharpen the street mood. In a crisis like this, everyone with a microphone owns a piece of the de-escalation, but law enforcement carries the heaviest burden because policing is not just about force, David. It's about community consent. The strongest signal is not dominance. It's restraint that people can see.
Well, I agree with everything you said, maybe until that last point in terms of what the strongest signals are. And I'll save that for later. But I think this kind of boils down to where most news boils down to right now. It's not really about facts. It's not even about the sequence of events. It tends to be about feelings. And I see two feelings coming to the fore. On the local side, it's really fear. And there is a fear, and some could say a legitimate fear, about a secret police demanding documentation and shooting people in the face who may not be able to produce it or are perceived as not being fully compliant. And on the other side, it's anger. And I think there's a lot of anger directed towards people who are protesting what they see as a legitimate mission from a federal agency to address illegal immigration. And those two things are irreconcilable. The fear and the anger are almost, as you say, they're talking past each other. So I think that's one thing to acknowledge. I think the second thing to acknowledge is where does this go from here? And I think this is a tinder keg. I really do. I think the one mitigating factor is that it's happening in the dead of winter. And I think these protests could be much larger, much more difficult, and lead to much worse outcomes if it weren't happening in the winter. Last thing I'll say is just kind of how it's being framed. And we went from a dehumanization of undocumented workers, which has really produced a lot of anger on one side. That zone has spread out now to dehumanizing protesters. And the language being used, comply or die, is one that kind of feeds the fear on the other side. So this feels like a vicious cycle. I don't know how it gets de-escalated, but I'm watching it with real concern, real anxiety.
Don't you think it's going to be de-escalated next week? Trump's going to have the attention on him in Davos. I'm just throwing that out there.
Maybe.
Distraction, yeah.
Yeah. Why will that be? Why will that be distraction, Joanna?
He's showing up in Davos next week. So there are 65 heads of states, and he's the only one we're talking about. And everyone is waiting to hear what he's got to say. And everyone sort of falls in line when he's there. So he can come off as being the strongest leader, and that's going to give him power to go back home and see, the world's listening to me and doing what I'm asking them to do. Should be the same back home.
Yeah. Farzana, any thoughts on what's happening in Minnesota?
Well, I wanted to pull on Joanna's thread in terms of Davos, actually, because that's my story for the week. And as PRs, people like us, we've been working for year in, year out, trying to get media engagements for our clients, stakeholder engagement. I mean, it is super efficient for our CEOs to fly out there and meet various different people from political, government, business, and so forth. And it's just from a diary management perspective, it's really useful to physically be there, so you don't have to always try and coordinate diaries of incredibly busy people who are constantly traveling. But what I wanted to bring Joanna in is because, of course, Joanna's a proper Davos insider. And, Joanna has not only been helping bring her sort of clients, CEOs, etc., how to navigate Davos, but also has been part of the World Economic Forum team as well. So, Joanna, this is a picture of you in Davos. Now, tell us, how many years have you been going to Davos and working with them in the team, working with others outside on how to navigate it? And what has changed over this incredible trajectory, this vantage point that you have with being in that Davos world for so long?
So scarily enough, it's going to be my 18th Davos. And I would say things have changed a lot. Yes, the forum was started with really this idea of bringing a multi-stakeholder platform, bringing people who have influence or who have, be it from the business world, civil society, government, together to address the world and solve some of these bigger problems together. They still all come to Davos now, but they're not there to talk anymore amongst themselves, I think. And if anybody's in comms and PR and helping companies on their Davos strategies and world economic strategies, it's about how do I use this platform, because so many people are there, but just to get my message out and broadcast it out. And I think that's a real reflection of where we are in the world. And it's sort of unfortunate because I think the forum is trying to get back to that dialogue. The theme of this year's annual meeting is a spirit of dialogue, but the sense we're getting is I'm showing up and I'm going to try and use it as much as possible to get my own personal message out and my own personal agenda taken care of.
You know, Joanna, you and I were speaking about, and again, you were so kind to me, you know, with a few others in terms of shepherding me around the Congress Center and kind of the periphery. The periphery is now the zone now, right? I mean, that's where a lot of the action happens. They're staged events. I think there's something like 700 side events. So I'm saying this as someone who has benefited from my own relationship with people like you at the forum, big fan of its overall mission. But does this new emphasis, this kind of attention economy focus, does that diminish the forum's brand or impact in some way, or does it just change it in a different direction?
I think they're really different Davos experiences, and I'm sure more and more people are hearing about, you know, or seeing people saying, I'm going to Davos, I'm going to the World Economic Forum. Going to Davos, which is just the name of a town in Switzerland, yes, definitely they're going to Davos. Are they going to the World Economic Forum? Most of the people are not. They're on the sideline. And what has happened is that a huge amount of media companies has started organizing sideline programming. A huge amount of, you know, people with their own agendas are creating their own events and claiming it is the World Economic Forum and where these exchanges are happening. And that's not what's going on. That doesn't mean you're not going to have great connections and great moments, but it is not the platform that it used to be, where the only people in Davos were the people who were invited by the World Economic Forum and were peer-to-peer. You've got here a lot of people showing up who are audience members, listening or attending events where some of these executives or politicians or, you know, people from civil society who are official WEF invitees are speaking on the outskirts and speaking to an audience. And that's something that's going on.
So you've got an event with an agenda and you have speakers, and particularly if you're from a strong brand, you want your CEO or whomever on stage speaking. But the reality is people are creating their own events and networking, and that's sort of usurped the entire agenda. It sounds like every PR conference that I've been to or heard of, or like any even accounting conference. This is the kind of in my mind, the democratization of events.
I would call it a democratization, but also it's not the same event anymore.
Right.
You think you're part of it, but the reality is, and I think David remembers these days where you just walked around, and just by walking around, you bumped into people and you chatted and you were hanging out and you assumed you were there because you were somewhat peers, or there was a legitimacy for you being there. Your CEO was in the Congress Center. You can't access, but you're the number 2 guy. There's a legitimacy for being there, guy or woman. I'm using the generic term. What you're hearing now is you've got all those people. They don't want to hang. They don't want to walk down the street of Davos anymore because they're harassed. They're, you know, it's just not a peer-to-peer safe place. It's just, you've got over, I would say, about 10,000 people at least coming this year on the sideline. There are only 2,500 or maybe max 3,000 white badges, official people in the Congress Center. If they walk around, they're going to be bothered. So I think what you end up with is a sense of it being more open and accessible. But the reality is, it's just like our society in general. I would say the American economy in a way. The really powerful are more and more in secluded events that nobody knows about, off the record, really hard to hear about. and the rest are somewhere else.
Yeah,
Joanna,
sorry,
I want to ask Joanna, do you think that Davos actually has a bit of a PR problem, that it's maybe considered as too elitist, too out of touch, a bit of a talking shop, and people have kind of cottoned on that it's not where real interesting conversations are taking place. It's one-way communication. It's just people projecting. And, for instance, if you look at, Davos, the World Economic Forum, rather, they released a report on risks. So they produce a lot of thought leadership because, of course, they want to be positioned as, this forum with really highly consequential conversations, and they release a report in terms of the risks that they, and I think misinformation, disinformation, I think was number 2, which I thought was quite interesting. But I wanted to ask you: do people care? Do people care about what the World Economic Forum has to say? Do people really listen and tune into their reports and their thought leadership, or is it basically just a place where people go to take selfies, to network, and they are just not listening? Or is it a sign of our society that we don't actually listen? We are just projecting. Everything is an opportunity for a selfie and not really an opportunity to learn and listen and lean in.
I think it's the latter. I mean, I definitely think the forum still has at its premise and its goal to bring together people around the table. I think more and more people don't want to be at the table. They are constantly asking, what's the benefit? Am I expected to be seated in a room for an hour? No, I need to be, I want to be moving. I need something else, right? And so that is just the reality, unfortunately, I think, of our society. I think the fact that the forum continues, though, to try and produce certain reports, I think they have too much thought leadership, and so we forget what they stand for. But I think this, for instance, the Global Risk Report is one that has come out every year right before the annual meeting. Yes, the CEOs might not really be paying attention to it right now, but it will come out in the discussions because, you do have, this is one of the few places in the world that can bring together people from so many around the world. It's neutral. Switzerland's still considered neutral. And it's not and you've got business, you've got civil society, and you've got government. And there are not any other places in the world that can bring these type of people in the room. But as you pointed out, there's a festival around, and I would ignore. I don't think the festival gives you a sense of what's going on, but that is definitely a comms machine, and not a reactive thought. Not the thought leadership and exchange that should be happening in the Congress Center.
And Jonah, how much does it cost to actually go and be a delegate? And I was on a phone to a friend of mine who said to me that increasingly more and more PRs are heading out to Davos and hosting their own events, which is quite interesting. But talk us through, how much does it cost roughly? What's the hierarchy of these different color badges? What does that world look like?
There's a cost, and I don't have the latest fees. There's definitely a membership, and I think and again, it's, if you're an academic, if you're a politician, you're not paying. The private sector, it actually underwrites a huge part of the forum. The thing is that, yes, it's getting costly and costlier because you also have more and more things happening on the sideline. And I think it's a great example to see how media has used the World Economic Forum and other events to create live programming, which is something they can monetize, which they can't monetize their other traditional business. And Bloomberg, Semaphore, CNBC, Wall Street Journal, they all have parallel program to the annual meeting the entire week, and they are monetizing it because it's become pay to play there. And that's what makes it more costly.
I know we're probably coming up on time, but just a couple comments on the thought leadership. I would predict, I'd probably even bet, that the global risk assessment, that report, that will be the feature of 1 million PR firm decks, presentations in the next quarter, as will the Edelman Trust barometer, which also usually debuts at Davos. So I still think it's a good platform for showcasing certain points. view or thought leadership. But Joanna, what do you tell clients who think that they might have some chance of cutting through? I mean, is that even remotely possible in the milieu that we see in Davos right now?
I don't think your goal should be to come in and try to cut through. I think your goal should be about meeting and being in the room with the right people. You can cut through afterwards. That's my positioning on this. Unless you have an amazing story, an amazing angle, something important and relevant at that point in time. But this should not be about trying to, stand out. There's too much going on. There's 700 side events, not talking about what's going on in the Congress Center and things. Nothing. Your event's not going to stand out. Your speaking role is not going to stand out.
But to your earlier point, I'll make this my last comment.
Yeah.
That's not what a lot of people are going for, right? They want to have that backdrop. They want to imply that they are in the rooms where the action is happening, and that they're part of the insider crowd. Whether or not people listen to anything they say after that, they just kind of want to be seen. And believe me, I've done the same thing. I took the same selfies when I was there. So you might even taken some of those photos. So I get it. Well, thank you so much for the inside view. I know you're going to have a busy week. In our last few minutes, I just want to shift it over because Doug, you and Prasanna, I did catch your show, the other show that you guys do. I thought it was
Stories
an
and
interesting
Strategies.
Yeah, Stories and Strategy show on aging in the PR industry. And as someone who just passed I'll just call it a significant annual milestone myself, maybe I'm a little more sensitive to this than others, but just wondering what you guys thought, if you had any takeaways from that show.
Prasanna, what was your social media feed like? Because I not a huge spike, but I saw a bump on my socials from this episode with Jenny Manchester on aging. It definitely got some attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ageism, it's a thing in the PR industry, and so much so that so many PRs actually decide to leave, in particular consumer PR, because they feel actually that it just has an obsession with youth, and that actually to be any good at PR, you have to sort of understand what the next generation, and by having close proximity in age, the sort of the flawed thinking is that you have a sort of a feel on trends. And so it is. And I think the reason why it really struck so many people is because it exists. And I think that, as an industry, we really do need to clean that aspect of our industry up.
I think we have a clip from Jenny in the episode. Let's have a listen to what Jenny had to say.
The thing about ageism, which I've discovered as part of my research and talking to so many people about their experiences, is that I found ageism is one of those areas of discrimination that's sort of hidden in plain sight. It's really perpetuated by the assumptions people make around what people can do as they grow older in the profession. And those assumptions are what drive and perpetuate more and more ageism in people's workplaces, basically.
And that was one of the clips we put on social media and got a good response, and like not just Facebook, where you'd think the old people go on social. So it's good. Yeah, that episode's out right now. It'll be a new episode on Tuesday, but that one's on the feed right now. I think we're out of time. Joanna, thank you so much for joining from Paris.
Thank you all for having me.
Yeah, we had
Good luck next week.
Yes.
Thank you.
We had a few comments. There we go. Sorry, on my screen. Anshul Sushil, and Anshul, if I'm saying your name wrong, I'm so sorry. Thanks for hosting this, folks. Very insightful. I think we had a comment from Emery Blake as well.
She was looking at the numbers.
Pricing, yes. Depends on how you decide to show up, but yes, it is not cheap.
I don't have that 70,000 pounds as spare pocket change. And then we had one more comment, because all comments are fair as well, right? I know, David, this one, I know that won't ring necessarily true with you. And we had another one, and I'm not sure who Chris. I know a TV producer or a movie producer named Chris Atkins. Am I missing the mark on that one?
I think it came up on my LinkedIn feed, and I can't look at that and look at the screen at the same time. So we're gonna have to assume that yes, it was to normalize it.
Chris Atkins, if you can fix it, man. Fix it. And then of course we had a few other comments, and you know the way these things go. We're not gonna put those ones up. So As always, thank you to our superstar producers, Emily Page and Solomon eBay. Appreciate all your work. Like you are the grease in the machinery. The Week Unspun is a co-production of Curzon Public Relations, Fullgate Advisors, Stories and Strategies podcast. Recordings on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Give them a listen, a like, a share. And of course, our final thought for the week. If you're someone who naturally takes control, it takes courage to soften your instinct when your instinct is control. Control feels safe. Softness feels exposed. But the moment you choose curiosity over certainty, you shift the entire emotional landscape of the room. That's not control, but that is leadership. Take care of yourself. Take care of those around you. Have a great weekend.